Hey, welcome back to the Jesus Discussion. We're picking up here in Mark chapter 6. And just a reminder, the whole point is Everett, I'm just trying to do my best impersonation of Jesus. For whatever decisions that I have, I want to use those decisions to bend my life towards something that looks more and more like Jesus every day. That today, hopefully, I'm doing a better job of living like Jesus than I did yesterday. And tomorrow I'm doing a better job than I was doing today. And so to do that, I have to keep going back to these ancient writings and re-looking at these writings and kind of making sure that I've got my rendering of Jesus that I'm trying to copy right. Because, that's what my meditation is on that Jesus, the Jesus from the first century. And that's what my goal is. And that's what my hope is. That's who my faith is in. So that's really the focus of this podcast. And we're glad you've joined us back here in chapter 6. Everett, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that, in studying, for want of a better term, religion, every error that comes about starts with twisting who God is or twisting who Jesus is. So it's important for us, we say have the right Jesus, and then the comeback is, well, there's only one Jesus. That's true. There's only one Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah, God incarnate. There's only one. But people redefine Jesus, and that's what we have to be careful that we get who Jesus is. We got to get that right.
Yeah, and I catch myself, going back through these writings and going, I remembered that wrong. And I like what Paul says in Romans chapter 12, every day I renew my mind and then I live that out with my body. That's my act of worship. And so, the idea of going back to the writings is not an idea of just learning liturgy and memorization. It's going back and saying, is the Jesus that I'm worshiping the same Jesus from the first century? Because I'm a human being, so I'm likely to make an error here and there. And this matters too much. I agree. I've heard from people, and there's we were talking about twisting who God is, and that happens, sometimes it happens intentionally and, with bad motive. But sometimes it's just the fact that we're human and something makes a little more sense to us, and so we'd rather have it this way. And It can be a scary thing to reconsider what we think we already know about who Jesus is. If what we have works, it can be challenging to go back and go, but that's not what Jesus said. And to realize that we have some change to do on our horizon. So,
right.
Yeah. Now, if you want to read a verse for us, we love it when our listeners volunteer to read verses, namely because I don't have to read the verses. No, but if you want to be featured on our show, we would love that. And just send us an email to info@thejesusdiscussion.com, and we'll send you a chunk of verse, and you can just record it on your phone. Doesn't have to be the most epic recording ever, and we'll feature you in an episode of the Jesus Discussion. Okay, so I think we're ready for the verse, and we've got Rob who read the verse for us. So here we go. This is Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 6.
Jesus left there and went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. When the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. "Where did this man get these things?" they asked. "What's this wisdom that has been given him, that he even does miracles? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, Only in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own house is a prophet without honor. He could not do any miracles there except lay hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their lack of faith.
This is, Everett, in this next section, there's this line in here: a prophet is not without honor except in his native place, among his own kin. A prophet's not respected in his hometown. That's an axiom that has traveled far and wide and well beyond people who just read the Bible. But this whole section here, where Jesus returns to his hometown, is a pretty fascinating section. And this is really, this specific rendering of it, that the way Mark tells it, is really unique to Mark's narrative. What are some things that that we should be looking for in this section?
Well, one of the things that we see is, Jesus has done all these amazing things and gathered, for want of a better term, a following. So he goes back to his own, where his own people are, his hometown, and the reception is a little bit different, because he's not, a stranger who comes on the scene and does all these wonderful things. He shows up and they say, well, wait a minute, this is the carpenter. And so Jesus, to me, the verse 5 is very telling. He could do no miracle there except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them. And then in verse 6, he wondered at their unbelief. So that the sovereignty of God is at work here, obviously. But the people were unwilling to come to him in faith, because he was someone that they knew. He wasn't a religious scholar. He wasn't a king. He was the carpenter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something else in verse 3 that always sticks out to me. Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Right. A lot of people say, well, Joseph had probably died, or something like, that Jesus' father had passed on, or whatever. But even if that's true, in the first century, you would always relate someone to their father, not their mother.
Right.
And
they
the relation,
said, this is,
yeah, you would have still said, isn't this the son of Joseph? But what they're acknowledging is that he's an illegitimate son in their mind. What they're saying is, this isn't the son of Joseph. That, pardon the expression, but this is a bastard.
Right.
And that's a harsh term in that era. How can this be the Messiah if he's not even a legitimate son of his own father? Because we know Messiah has to be a son in the line of David. And so they're challenging the idea that he might be Messiah.
Right.
And that's also the appeal to his vocation, right? Isn't this the carpenter? Because the prediction of the Messiah in their mind in the first century, what people were looking for was most likely a warrior king, someone who could free them from Rome's oppression and give them back their independence.
Right.
So how is this carpenter, this illegitimate son? I mean, look, there's his sisters over there. He's just another kid in the town. And so this begins, we talked about misframing Jesus and misframing God, and here it is that they have a preconceived notion of who God's supposed to be, who Jesus is supposed to be. And when it doesn't comport, when their rendering of Messiah isn't the same thing that Jesus is, then it's a lot easier to say, well, then that's not right, than it is to change your mind.
Right, and we're the same way. We have preconceived ideas, whether you're talking about politics or science, creation, whatever. And when something challenges those preconceived notions, it's much easier to simply say, well, they're wrong, than it is to examine your own beliefs and your own ideas in light of what the information that you're receiving.
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned before, if you send us a question to questions@thejesusdiscussion.com, or if you comment on anywhere this podcast is posted, we'll handle that with intellectual integrity. We're not afraid to look back at something we said or thought and go, is that accurate to what history is, to what this text meant in history? But even that, it's a challenge to reconsider. If I understood everything perfectly, then I would live perfectly, right? The only place I would make a mistake is where I was willfully making a mistake. But I know that's not true. I do things, and they aren't things that Jesus would do, and I'm not aware that they're not what Jesus would do. So the only answer to that conundrum is to reconsider who Jesus is, and continue to go back through these texts. So yeah. I hope that didn't get too Dr. Seussy there. Dr. Seuss-ish.
Yeah.
So Everett, one of these things that, in verse 5 and 6, talks about this kind of lack of faith. And sometimes we can overextend that argument. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about, how do we keep from putting too much on various parts of the text and what they mean?
Well, we have to, of course, let the text speak for itself. And one of the challenges of living in our time is there are so many people that have written about Mark's record here, that have written books on theology, and some of them are heavyweight books that you'd expect to find in a graduate school, and many of them are written for popular consumption, and they help us. They cause us to form ideas about the text that the text may not actually be saying. And we've always got to guard against that. So I think that we've got to know, background and history and all of that goes into understanding Mark's time and his audience and his writing style. But at the end of the day, we can't let someone else tell us that it meant this and that when the text says something different.
Right. And a lot of times we want to go back and look then topically and systematically at things. We want to say, okay, faith. Now I'm going to pull up every verse about faith, and then I'm going to try and cram them all together. And it's as if we took the Bible and we cut every sentence about faith out, and then we put them all into one document and try and rearrange them and glue them down to make a whole new thing. Like, that's not actually understanding what each author was saying. That's reading into it and reading around it. And what you would really want to do is understand full paragraphs and then, kind of track that way if you were going to go from book to book. But yeah, a lot of times, because faith is such a common topic, it's mentioned several times in Mark's gospel, and it's really a thematic thing, but it's also mentioned in so many other books, then sometimes we want to zoom in on faith and then look for the epiphany about faith, and the moral of the story here is something about faith. And that's not the moral of this story. It's an observation that they had a lack of faith, but he's not trying to teach. Mark is not trying to teach how to have faith. He's observing that they didn't have faith, if that makes sense. And he's not trying to teach about the causes and effects of having faith or not having faith. But speaking of faith, faith is a real thematic thing in the book of Mark. He talks a lot about, it's their faith in the boat with the storm, and talks a lot about what it means to have faith and where your faith is placed. And the end of Mark's gospel really challenges us, in a sense, on this topic of faith. It doesn't end with this, ascension narrative and, Jesus spending 40 days with everyone, and as other narratives in the New Testament do. It just ends with, he was crucified, the women went and saw him in the grave, rising from the dead, and then they kind of all leave with a sense of shock and awe. And so it challenges the reader about what they're going to put their faith in. Are you going to believe this story? Do you have faith enough? Do you believe? All right, so Everett, we've got this chunk here where he goes to his hometown and he starts teaching in the synagogue, and they're amazed at his teaching, and that draws everyone in and it gets everyone's attention. And then they're puzzled because they're like, well, why is this doesn't make sense, because he's an illegitimate child. He's a carpenter. I mean, he's just one of the common us. So the cognitive dissonance that's going on in the town, sometimes that can cause you to reconsider things. But it seems that for these people in Jesus' hometown, it more hardens them and turns them away from Jesus instead of causes them to reconsider their misconceptions. Is there anything else?
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's just what we were talking about. Yeah, exactly. That we have to allow the Bible to challenge our preconceptions rather than try to make the Bible fit our preconceptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fancy word is exegesis, not eisegesis, right? Where when you exegete something, one of those nerdy terms, you're pulling the meaning from the writing, and when you're being eisegetical, you're putting the meaning back into the writing, right? So I could take the Harry Potter series and cut out certain chunks and make the villain look like the good guy, but that would be putting the meaning into the book rather than taking the meaning from it.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that's really a good chunk. I know it's a shorter chunk, but there really is a lot in that verse. And then this next section here is something I think we probably want to handle as a cohesive unit. So, Everett, is there anything else on this section, verses 1 through 6, that you want to bring up?
No.
All right. Well, thanks again for tuning in to the Jesus Discussion. We look forward to catching up with you next time. Again, if you have questions or comments or anything like that, feel free to send us an email at questions@thejesusdiscussion.com or comment on any of the places where this podcast is posted. You can find us at thejesusdiscussion.com or tune in to soundcloud.com/The Jesus Discussion. We're also available on Apple and Google Podcasts and wherever podcasts are found or available. So thanks again, and we hope you have a wonderful week.